Brandon Boston Jr. at one point was my number 4 prospect in this draft. At the beginning of the season, he was somebody who I thought had a chance to be a top 2 to 3 player in the draft. I thought he had a high-end number 2, low-end number 1 kind of ceiling. However, after a disappointing year at Kentucky, BJ Boston has free-fallen on most people's boards, and he has fallen a lot on my board as well. However, I still believe that BJ Boston is a first-round talent, and today I'm going to talk about how, despite a bad freshman season, he should still be a first-round pick and somebody that controversially I believe should be considered in the late end of the lottery. But before we get into today's video, I've noticed that 60.5% of you guys that watch my videos happen to not be subscribed. You happen to fall into that 60.5%, or you just happen to be new and like what you see. Feel free to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and be notified whenever I release a video. I make videos to take elements from film essays and apply them to basketball. I also make videos covering the NBA draft like this video, and high school basketball as well. So if any of those things are of interest to you, this is the channel for you. Let's try to get 100 likes on this video so YouTube will recommend it to others. But with that being said, let's get right into the video. BJ Boston is from Norcross, Georgia. He played his first 3 years of high school basketball at Norcross in, obviously, Norcross, Georgia. He played his final season at Sierra Canyon alongside a lottery talent in Zaire Williams, a top 3 player in the 2022 recruiting class in Murray Bailey, and the son of LeBron James, Bronny James. BJ Boston was ranked 5th by Rivals, he was ranked 6th by 24/7 Sports, and he was ranked 7th by ESPN. He would commit to play his college basketball at Kentucky. However, he only would average 11.5 points a game, 4.5 rebounds per game, and 1.6 assists per game on a 44.72 shooting percentage in his lone season at Kentucky, and he would declare for the NBA draft. When it comes to the strengths of BJ Boston, the first one that stood out to me was his shot creating potential. Keyword being potential. He did struggle shooting the basketball in college. It was very evident both by numbers and by just watching him play just because of the inconsistencies. However, there were plenty of flashes of shot creating potential. Flashes that mirror what he was doing in high school and on the EYBL circuit that made me so high on him as a prospect going into that year. So that's something that I always found very encouraging, that there were still flashes of what made him so intriguing entering the year. Even when he was free falling on boards, that was still something that was there. Secondly, his 3-point shooting. He's somebody that didn't start out the college season that well from 3. He only shot 15.2% from 3 on 3.7 attempts over the first 9 games. However, over the final 16 games, he shot 37.3% from 3 on 4.2 attempts, which means that he was showing improvement, and for a larger chunk of that second half of the season for him, he was an at least average 3-point shooter. There still was a lot of inconsistencies, but showing an encouraging improvement, going from like beyond below average to straight up horrible from 3 to a pretty respectable 3-point shooter is an encouraging sign. He also did have plenty of games throughout the year that did suggest that, he could, be a good player. He did have encouraging games against, South Carolina. He had an encouraging game against Auburn, things like that. He just looked very good, and there were signs of the player that I thought he could be coming out of high school, even if that player still isn't fully there. But again, the 3-point shooting improvement really was encouraging. One thing that he's always had is his handle. He's a very good handler of the basketball. He's somebody that has the ball on a string. He's somebody that just really, it's just something that is translated to this level. It's the best way I can put it. And at that size, to have a handle like that, that is very good and something that you really can't take away from him as a prospect. He did show some rebounding potential as well. He has very long arms, which I'll talk about in his next strength as well. But, even given his slight frame, it wasn't like he wasn't giving effort on the boards based off what I was watching him do. 4.5 rebounds per game in college, that isn't great, but given his frame, I think that is a very encouraging sign. Obviously, I think he plays the passing lanes very well due to his long arms, has a near 7-foot wingspan, good flexibility as an athlete, has great contortion as well, and he has an aggressive mindset. There was a thing going around that I didn't think was true, which was the fact that people were saying, oh, he doesn't have a tough mindset and he's quote-unquote soft. He wasn't soft necessarily, because it didn't have to do with his mindset. He had a very aggressive mindset, and I do think that why people were believing that he was soft has more to do with something that I'll talk about in his weakness section, but he clearly did have an aggressive mindset. I don't think that's something that was considered like a weakness going in, and even though people want to say it is now, I don't think it is. I definitely think he does still have that aggressive mindset, and it's something that I think people misconceptualized with him a lot. But again, obviously he does have weaknesses as well, so we gotta talk about them as well. When it comes to Brandon Boston Jr.'s weaknesses, the first one that stood out to me was his strength. He had a slight frame going in, and I believe I said something along the lines of, I think, it wouldn't be a big problem due to his aggressive mindset, his ability to not care about, like, if the defenders may be a bit bigger than him, and it's not going to stop his mindset of trying to attack. It was something that I found very similar to Brandon Ingram when Brandon Ingram was coming out of high school as well, because of the fact that with both of them, they weren't very much, strong athletes going in. They definitely had slight frames, but they had that aggressive mindset. And Ingram was even skinnier than Brandon Boston Jr. was coming out of high school. So, I definitely thought it was something that would work, but it clearly hasn't. He's somebody that gets thrown off even with the slightest amount of contact. You can just tell the frame isn't something that's in his favor, to say the least. It's very similar to Zaire Williams, where they just can't handle contact that well. Even if they want to attack, and he still has an attacking mindset, he just can't attack because of, the fact that he's just not that strong right now. He does have a lack of burst and quickness. It's a reason why he was so inconsistent as a shooter, just because he couldn't create separation well. Even if there were flashes, he couldn't create separation consistently due to a lack of burst and lack of quickness. He didn't have a first step to get around defenses that was great either. Inconsistent shooting as well. Obviously it showed up throughout the year. This again goes to the fact that he doesn't have great burst. He doesn't have great quickness either. So, that is something to look out for. And he's a non-passer as well. There weren't a lot of encouraging signs for him as a passer throughout the year. Assist per game numbers, and that's the word, don't tell the full story of passing. Obviously, we've seen this with many players before, where their assist numbers at the previous levels, they aren't great, but then it gets to the NBA and they have great assist numbers. I don't think it's the case with BJ Boston. When I watched him play, I didn't really see a lot of encouraging signs for him as a passer, and I think it's something that really puts the pressure on him to develop his strength and develop his shot consistency, things like that, because of the fact that he doesn't have a passing skill to fall back on the way some other prospects may have in this draft, or have the potential as a passer compared to some of the other prospects in this draft at the wing spot. So this does put pressure on him to improve as a scorer. BJ Boston is ranked number 25 on my big board. His personal draft range for me is between 14 and 30. I definitely think that a team could take a swing on him in the late lottery. I would take a swing on him in the late lottery, depending on what team is available in that range. And I definitely think that he shouldn't fall out of the first round just based off the talent he has. However, the likely draft range for him is between 25 and 45. I could see him ending up in the late first round and anywhere to the mid second round. I definitely think there's a large sort of draft range with him. Some team may take a chance on his talent, maybe teams aren't willing to until the second round. We'll see on draft night. His ceiling to me is an above average shot creating wing. A while ago, I probably would have said his ceiling is an elite two-way shot creating wing. I do think he has some two-way potential, but I think based off what I've seen now, it's kind of hard to set that high of a ceiling on him, but I still think he can be an above average player in the league. His floor to me is a fence rotation microwave scorer. I think that, I never want to say, oh, he won't make the league, because I just don't think that's fair to a kid, because I definitely think he has talent, but, I do think that fringe rotation microwave scorer is something that will be his floor, because I do think that the talent, again, is obvious enough that a team will take a chance on him no matter what. Team bench, I would love to see him with the Spurs, because they have a great developmental staff. They have a great culture there. OKC Thunder, they have multiple first round picks. I do think that, maybe at 16 with the Boston pick, that's something that could be in play. And then you'll get the Nuggets, a late first round team. They could use a scorer off the bench, in my opinion, somebody that can just get buckets right away. And I think that, they've shown in Denver that they are willing to be patient with their draft prospects. And if you're patient with BJ Boston and Denver wants to develop him correctly, they could have a very, very dangerous weapon coming off that bench, and someone that, could end up looking like a steal in a few years. This isn't the first, and it won't be the last example of a top-ranked high school prospect falling on draft boards due to underperforming at the college level. But for Brandon Boston Jr., I personally believe that it had to do a lot with injury as much as it did with him as an actual prospect. Because for me, you don't go from a year ago dunking on Alex Antetokounmpo to this season where you can barely rim graze a dunk. I definitely think there was an injury that hindered his athleticism, because you just don't lose that kind of explosion as an athlete the way he did. And I do think though there are legit concerns with the frame. It's definitely something he will need to work on. I definitely underestimated how difficult the frame was to kind of translate to the college level, and he will need to add strength. NBA has great strength training programs, so I'm not too worried about that. And I do think though that overall I still believe in him as a talent in the first round, just because of the fact that you usually don't go from being legitimately one of the best amateur basketball players in the world, which he was. Go watch his stuff, and watch his tape. He was very good at the previous levels, to all of a sudden just not becoming good, or whatever he was at Kentucky. I definitely think that injuries played a factor, because injuries always play a factor in a player that was as good as Brandon Boston Jr. was at those previous levels, becoming not as good in college the way he did. And it's rare that injuries aren't a factor, because we've seen past examples of it, like I mentioned, but at the same time, it's different for me with Brandon Boston Jr., because I feel like the talent is still there with him that made me so high on him, whereas with the past examples, just things that they were doing in high school don't translate to college. And you could say the same thing about Brandon Boston Jr., but again, I think the injury and just not having a great frame probably played a factor, and I definitely think those are two things that can be fixable with a good NBA coaching staff, which he probably will get considering where he's projected to go in the draft. But that is the end of this video. If you've made it to this point, thank you so much. Again, if you haven't already, like, subscribe, do all those things, be a big help to me. Let me know what you think about BJ Boston in the comment section below. I know I've videos in the past absolutely praising BJ Boston and having him so high on my board. I think I had him as high as number 2 and number 3 on my board at some point before that season started. Obviously, things did not turn out that way, and again, while I'm not even close to as high as I was at one point, I still am pretty high on him, especially relative to where other people have him on their board. But let me know what you think of him in the comment section below. What team do you want to see him on? I'd love to hear that stuff. If you have more time, go watch another video. I have over 390 videos I've made on this channel, so if you like basketball, I'm warned about you'll find something else you like. So I would appreciate if you would check out another video if you got time. But with that being said, have a nice day.